Originally, when I joined the band, it was a five-piece band. Everybody was part of this corporation called Eagles Limited. We all owned Eagles Limited.
Don Felder was fired from the Eagles via cold fax. And the answer was no. So finally, I don't know who sent who a legal notice or whatnot, but it just came down that there was no and you're fired. 2 decades later, he spoke up. No more hiding, no more maintaining a good image. All the conflicts, the control, the injustice, and even the betrayal, he exposed them layer by layer, detail by detail. At 77, Felder doesn't need the Eagles anymore, but he needs to tell the truth. And this time, he's not leaving anything out. If you think you know everything about the Eagles, prepare yourself for what's about to come. In 1974, Don Felder joined the Eagles as guitarist and quickly redefined the group's sound. He not only added a strong rock sound to the band, but also expanded the country-influenced sound of previous albums. What Felder brought was more than just technique. It was musical personality, a distinct identity, and later the soul of the most famous guitar solo in the band's history. The 1976 release of Hotel California is an irreplaceable landmark. On music, the melody's conception began with a simple demo Felder played on a 12-string guitar at home in Malibu. The long, famous solo was a combination of technical virtuosity and rare musical emotion. It defined Felder to millions of fans, but also placed him at the center of a power struggle he could not win. Standing on a corner in Quincy, Arizona. Such music, a care. Beyond the spotlight, inside the Eagles was a hidden power structure in which Don Henley and Glenn Frey had total control. They decided everything from the songwriting direction to the tour set list to how the income was divided. Don Felder, though he co-wrote and performed the hits, had no equal say in a group whose reputation was built on harmony. The Eagles were divided by personal ambition and operated more like a company than a band. Felder refused to be silenced. He began to ask questions. Why were Henley and Frey given a larger share of the revenue when the collective effort was theirs? Why were other members' creative ideas constantly rejected or tightly controlled? These questions were not answered. Instead, they were viewed as threats. Felder's attitude was described as difficult to work with, although in reality, he was just trying to maintain fairness within the band. The conflict was not resolved, but escalated, especially when the Eagles reunited in 1994. During the Hell Freezes Over period, Felder continued to be excluded from financial decisions while still performing with the band. Lonely Teardrop's memories of things became so tense that in 2001 he was fired. No meeting, no direct explanation, just a cold written notice sent by fax. That event was a turning point for Felder. It meant not only losing his job, but also losing the right to claim a part of the legacy he had helped build. He responded with legal action, filing a lawsuit against Henley and Frey for breach of contract, wrongful removal from the band, and unfair distribution of profits. The lawsuit quickly became a media sensation, exposing a side of the Eagles that audiences had never seen. From creative partner, Felder became an outsider. The way the band handled their internal conflict revealed a clear hierarchy of power. While Henley and Frey continued to run the Eagles as a brand, Felder was labeled a talkative ex-member despite his contributions. After years of tension, the case was settled out of court in 2007. The amount of the settlement was not disclosed, but the nature of the dispute was not financial. It was honorary. Felder did not want to return to the band. He wanted to be recognized as an integral part of their history, not erased from the story he helped write. After leaving the Eagles and stepping away from the legal maelstrom, Don Felder did not disappear. In 2008, he released his memoir, Heaven and Hell, My Life of the Eagles, 1974 to 2001, a detailed insider's account. The book was immediately controversial because it not only recounted the past, but also exposed the manipulation, injustice, and discontent that had persisted within the band for decades. Felder writes with a straightforward tone. He doesn't hide his bitterness, nor does he soften his language to deflect blame. Each chapter reveals how power within the Eagles was concentrated in the hands of Glenn Frey and Don Henley, while the rest of the band was gradually pushed aside. These experiences are no longer personal. They are historical documents that show how the inner workings of a world-famous band were cutthroat. The book's impact extended beyond its readers. It immediately sparked a backlash from the other side. Don Henley and his legal team accused Felder of breaching his contract by disclosing inside information. The Eagles countered, seeking damages and blocking the release of certain parts of the electronic audio version of the memoir. The battle was no longer about the music. It was about whose story got to be told. The book is not just a tool of protest, but also a way for Felder to reclaim his place. He recounts every detail from group meetings where his voice was dismissed to tours that made him feel like he was working for two bosses rather than performing together in a band. The feeling of being left out recurs not just in his writing, but in his daily life. Heaven and Hell doesn't try to sugarcoat Don Felder. In the book, he admits that he was short-tempered, overreacted, and at times so exhausted that he wanted to give up. But because of that admission, the reader realizes that the memoir is not just about blaming others, but also about facing himself. Felder writes from an unhealed wound, and he lets it show. Opinions were divided. Some fans felt Felder was simply seeking attention by digging up the past, but most felt the memoir was a necessary look into the workings of legendary bands, where talent and fame are not always rewarded with justice. In interviews since the book's release, Felder has continued to insist that he held back on details. "I didn't write it to destroy anybody," he said. "If I wanted to, it would be a lot heavier." Felder's statement suggests that he understood the weight of his story and chose not to push it to the limit. What's remarkable is that more than a decade after the book's release, Felder has stood firm. In recent conversations, he has emphasized that heaven and hell is the truth from his own perspective, unvarnished. Unvarnished. He doesn't shirk responsibility for speaking his mind, nor does he change his perspective just to assuage someone else's discomfort. From a content perspective, Heaven and Hell is more than just an artist's memoir. It's a history of a legendary band run like a corporation where art must obey power. Felder describes exactly the price of silence and why he chose not to endure it any longer. Relations between the members after the book became more tense than ever. Henley declined to comment in depth, only confirming that he disagrees with what Felder wrote. Joe Walsh and Timothy B. Schmidt remained neutral, neither directly denying nor publicly endorsing. Felder remained clear. If he did not speak up, no one would tell what really happened. Although he was no longer a part of the Eagles, Don Felder did not choose to remain silent in the shadows forever. After the door closed with the band, he did not turn back to seek his former glory, but quietly walked forward where he could tell his own story in the language that had been with him all his life, music career after leaving Eagles. In 2012, Felder released his solo album, Road to Forever. It wasn't a high-profile comeback attempt, but rather a confirmation that he could still write songs, play guitar, and run a musical project the way he wanted to. The album was deeply personal with lyrics about loss, change, betrayal, and learning to move on. It wasn't just a studio product. It was the culmination of more than a decade of music pent up in the wake of internal turmoil, the aftermath of a breakup he had endured in silence. Following that success, in 2019, he released American Rock and Roll, a cross-generational album featuring rock heavyweights like Slash, Mick Fleetwood, Sammy Hagar, and Chad Smith. Felder proved not only that he could operate independently, but that he had earned the respect of his peers enough to put together a quality product. No longer controlled by any power structure, he became the center of his own music. Since 2010, Felder has maintained a steady touring schedule. While he no longer plays on the huge stages he did with the Eagles, he still attracts a steady audience at theaters, festivals, and classic rock shows across the country. During those shows, Felder always carries Hotel California as an integral part of his repertoire, but he also devotes significant time to new material, a way of asserting that he is not tied to a specific time in the past. In particular, 2025 marked another turning point in Felder's career with the album The Vault, 50 Years of Music. This project is not simply a collection of old recordings. This is an excavation of musical memories with many unreleased demos carefully recorded, edited, and mixed. The songs on the album have diverse colors from classic rock to introspective ballads. Guests on the album include Steve Lukather, David Page, and Joseph Williams of Toto, proving that Felder is still respected by his colleagues and is willing to accompany him on serious artistic projects. In addition to his musical career, Felder has devoted his time to education and community service. He has taught guitar workshops, appeared on writing and performing panels, and supported free music education programs for youth. This not only helps him stay connected to the new generation, but also affirms that music for Felder is a tool for connection, not just a means of making a living. In February 2025, during a performance on the Rock Legends cruise, Felder suffered a health incident in the middle of Tequila Sunrise. He was taken off stage and taken to the nearest medical facility. Initial information determined the cause was severe dehydration due to harsh weather conditions. After a few days of recovery, Felder proactively sent a message to reassure fans, affirming that he was fine and would return to the stage as soon as possible. However, this incident was a clear reminder that at 77 years old, his physical condition is no longer what it used to be, and each appearance is more selective. What's remarkable is that Felder has never used age as an excuse for a decline in productivity. He's still writing, still recording, still showing up where it matters. Not to cling to the spotlight, but to prove that his voice literally and figuratively still has weight. More than 2 decades after leaving the Eagles, he doesn't need them to survive in music. He survives by his own survival and his choice not to stop, peeling off the layers of memories. Today, Don Felder no longer seems angry about the past. But his silence over the past 2 decades is not because he has forgotten, but because he is choosing a different approach. In interviews in 2024 to 2025, Felder began to talk more about his inner self, his post-conflict perspective, and why he does not want to reopen an old war even though he still has enough details to do so. Being kicked out of the Eagles was a blessing, he once said. It may sound like a light statement, but it was a process of self-unraveling. For Felder, stepping away from an environment where every decision was controlled was not a total loss, but a way to rediscover his worth. He called it a time when he learned the difference between cooperation and obedience. Felder tried to reconcile with Glenn Frey after his firing, but received no response. In 2016, when Frey died, he attended the memorial service, maintaining a respectful tone in his statements to the media. In a recent interview, Felder reiterated, "I'm not happy that Glenn died, but I'm not pretending that we were on good terms. There was a gap between us that will never be filled." This isn't a harsh remark. It's a clear-eyed acknowledgement of reality. As for Don Henley, their relationship remained quiet and distant. On the rare occasions they met at music events, the two maintained a minimal courtesy. Felder never publicly attacked Henley after the loss of his closest collaborator Glenn Frey. "There are things I still disagree with about the way Henley ran the band, but that's in the past." He said, "I choose to live in the present." That statement was not a retreat, but a declaration of boundaries. Unlike when he released his memoir, Felder now doesn't rehash the details of his conflicts just to get attention. He's selective about what he says to the media. Instead of focusing on drama, he focuses on the experience of surviving trauma. "I don't forgive to make them feel better," he told Essential. "I forgive so I don't have to carry the burden anymore." Forgiveness isn't about the other person, but about making a conscious choice to end a recurring cycle of negative emotions. In his seminars and workshops, Felder also shares the psychological aspect of living in a creative environment where individual abilities are not properly recognized. He calls it a kind of invisible burnout. For young artists, Felder's advice goes beyond musical technique to a lesson in autonomy and how to maintain one's identity when working in a group with many personalities. Since 2020, Felder has appeared more frequently on music television shows, rock history documentaries, and in-depth podcasts. In each, he has taken a clear stance. He doesn't gloss over what happened, but he doesn't use it as a weapon either. Felder doesn't shy away from talking about the times he's been wronged, but he also doesn't try to drown others in judgment. That attitude makes his words carry more weight because they come from someone who has experienced it, not someone who just wants to repeat it for the sake of glory. Journalists have often tried to delve into untold details, but Felder keeps his distance. He knows his audience may be curious, but he also knows that respect begins with control of the narrative. "I don't want to turn my life into a long narrative," He says it's an affirmation that every time he speaks, he does so with a specific purpose, either to clarify or to close. Felder's choice to forgive doesn't lessen the severity of what happened. It doesn't change the fact that he was once cast out of what he created, but it does show that there is something more powerful than regaining his position, reclaiming peace in his own mind. And from there, he continues to work, continues to perform, continues to live without expecting anyone to rewrite history for him. Heritage of the excluded. If there's one thing Don Felder always brings up when he talks about his career, it's the guitar solo on Hotel California. Not because he's trying to cling to an old legacy, but because he knows it. It was that track that helped make the Eagles global icons. And he did it in his own room with a 12-string, no producer, no fancy studio, just pure emotion and technical virtuosity. Felder didn't write the lyrics to Hotel California, but the melody he sent to Glenn Frey and Don Henley, an instrumental demo, became the basis for a song that would define an era. When he reflects on that moment, he doesn't use the word proud lightly. He just says he did the best he could at the time. And thankfully, it's strong enough to stand the test of time. In his later solo performances, Hotel California was always the show's finale. Felder performed it in the same spirit. Every note was played almost exactly as the original because the audience came to hear what they remembered. Remarkably, he never tried to change the solo to make it different. He considered keeping the structure the same as an act of respect for the work and for the listener. The recognition he receives is not just from the audience. Many famous artists still work with him even knowing that Felder's past is full of disputes. That's how his colleagues see it. Looking beyond the drama to the ability Joe Satriani, Steve Lukather, they don't defend him in the press, but they choose to record with him on recent albums, and that speaks for itself. Felder didn't go into the studio to make peace with the past. He went in to continue doing what he believed he was born to do. Write music, play guitar, create something that would outlive him. The Vault, 50 Years of Music, is not an album of nostalgia. It's a statement that is not stuck with Hotel California, that is not limited by the Eagles, and that he doesn't need anyone else to validate what he's achieved. In the workshops and classes he's taken, Felder talks little about his old band. Instead, he talks about consistency, about practicing your craft long enough that when the opportunity comes, you can do something special. For young students, he's a role model not for fame, but for how to survive rejection without losing your identity. His career isn't mentioned as often in the mainstream media as the rest of the Eagles, but that doesn't make it any less valuable. To many musicians, Felder is a low-key character. He doesn't take over the stage with his image. He takes it with his sound. When it comes to his place in Eagles history, Felder doesn't ask for credit, nor does he ask to be invited back. "I'm not waiting for an apology," he said in a 2025 interview. "I did what I had to do. If it's not in the official record, it's in the music." This isn't a defensive remark. It's the attitude of someone who understands that time will tell what's true and what's just a passing fad. At 77, Don Felder doesn't have a 3-month tour, a private jet, or label deal. But he still shows up on stage, guitar in hand, and the audience still goes silent when he plays. He's not back in the Eagles, but he doesn't need to be because what he left behind in that band, whether intentionally forgotten or not, will still be played night after night by millions. If you find what you've heard or read has made you look at music from a different perspective, feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you find this content worthwhile, share it so others can learn more about a part of rock history that's rarely told in its entirety. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more stories like this. Thanks for sticking around until the end.